Hi, this is Elena with Black Sheep 303 Creative, and today I'm actually doing a product review or comparison test between the brand new iCraft purple tape from Thermoweb and paper tape, washi tape, and blue tape. So you can see my hand motions may not match up with my voiceover, so I apologize if it gets weird. But this is the purple tape. It's newish, came out like early this year, 2018. And that's Micropore or paper tape. I'm going to call it paper tape. That's what I normally use. This is washi tape. And then I'm going to try some blue painter's tape. And so I'm going to do some tests on this to see how the purple tape compares to the other three. The purple tape is 1.5 inches wide and it's 15 yards long. It is, in my opinion, fairly expensive at around $7.99 a roll. So I wanted to see, in comparison to other things that others use as well as myself, how it would do. So I've got some different paper here. I've got 100-pound white soft finish cardstock there. These two in the middle are 80-pound, and then this is some 60-pound kind of cheap black cardstock. So what I'm going to use this for the first test is what it is sort of advertised to do, which is to hold your dies in place on the paper as you run it through your die cutter and then peel off, like without harming the paper, just basically doing a great job of holding the dies without harming your paper in any way, shape, or form. So I picked those dies because they are kind of basic, but also kind of delicate. They have some detail to them. I wasn't really concerned about how well they would die cut. I know they die cut well through the papers, but I do want to see how well the tape does. And I use paper tape quite a bit to do this with my dies. And normally when I use it, I de-stick it a little bit first. Like I will stick it on my shirt or my pants like twice before I run it through the die cutter. This time I'm not going to do that, just to try to have a level playing field. So I'm not going to do that with any of these. Just going to take it right off the roll and run it through the die cutter. I have a Gemini die cutter, which is very, very strong. Like it exerts a lot of pressure. Die cuts very well, but so that can cause the tape to stick to paper quite a bit, just because of the pressure exerted on it as it goes through the die cutter. So here's washi tape. Now I don't ever use washi tape for this purpose, but I know some people do. So that's why I wanted to include this in my test. And then the painter's tape is like very similar in sort of texture and weight to the purple tape. So I wanted to see, was there really a difference between the purple tape and the blue painter's tape? Like they feel very much the same. They kind of about the same weight. They definitely have the same texture. So I wanted to try to test those two because the painter's tape is a lot less expensive ultimately. So so that's why I definitely wanted to include the painter's tape in this test. So I'm going to run these dies through my die cutter and we'll see what happens when I try to peel the tape off. Okay, so first I'm going to peel the purple tape off the 100-pound cardstock. I don't think the cardstock weight really made any difference as far as how well the tape held up, so I don't know why I needed to test different ones, but I did. So the purple tape is really, really stuck down. I don't know if that's just normal or if that's the pressure from the Gemini, but it really, really was adhered to the paper. And so it is taking a bit of effort to pull it off, but as you can see, it is not ripping the paper at all, and it holds up just fine. However, there was adhesive residue left on the paper. Now I could just roll it off with you can see me rubbing the paper with my thumbs. It just kind of rolled up into a ball, and like you could just brush it off. It's kind of like rubber cement, sort of. So it wasn't tough to remove, but I wasn't super happy about having to do that. Now I realize you may not really use the piece of paper that you've die cut things out of, but sometimes you do. Like I use the negative sometimes, and so having to do that extra thing, is a little bit of a bummer. Now my paper tape tore the paper a little bit, as you see there, when I initially started peeling it off. And that wasn't great, but I did kind of avoid doing it by twisting how I was peeling it off. And I think had I done the de-sticking a little bit first, that would not have happened because normally I don't have that problem. So I think because I just did it right off the roll, that was why the paper tore a little bit, but not too terribly. And I think also had I been a little more careful in how I removed it, I might have been able to avoid that entirely. The washi tape, when I start to peel this off, it starts to tear like itself, not the paper. It didn't tear the paper at all, but it tore off itself and kind of pulled apart. And to me, it was like too ripped apart by the end to really reuse it very much. Like once my paper tape starts doing that, like starts ripping apart because I've used it so much, that's when I throw it out. So I was not impressed with the fact that the washi tape kind of started tearing on itself almost right out of the gate. Although it didn't leave any residue on the paper, and it did pull off the paper without tearing it at all. Here's the blue tape. So this again was also stuck down pretty hard to the paper, much like they all were really. And when I peeled it off, it didn't leave any residue. It did not tear the paper. It does curl up into like a ball like that, but you can reuse it even though it's curled. But it did a great job. It didn't leave any residue. Neither did the washi tape, and neither did the paper tape. So overall on that, my rating would be 4 for the purple tape because it did leave the adhesive residue. This is out of a 5. 4 for the paper tape because it did peel the paper a little bit, and so you really need to de-stick it before you use it for this. 3 on the washi tape just because I felt like it tore so easily. It wasn't really that great. It was okay, but it would be tough to reuse that piece. And then the blue got a 4.5 from me because even though it curls up a little bit after you use it, you can continue to use it, and it didn't have any issues. Like it didn't tear the paper, it did not leave any adhesive. It did an overall good job. And then I did want to just mention really quick that I did do a test where I had each of the tapes hold down a stencil while I did some distressing ink through the stencil. And they all did great on that. They all got 5, and they all could be cleaned. All the tapes could be cleaned to be reused, except the paper tape will stain. So I just wanted to throw that in there quickly. Now my next test was to actually cut the die out of the tape itself, with the idea being that I was gonna use it as a mask. So I'm gonna cut the arrow shape out of each one of the tapes, and I will mask off the arrow to ink around it. And then we'll also do the negative where I'm going to mask off the inked area and color the arrow and see how each of these masks come out once I've cut them out. Okay, so now I've cut them out. They're stuck to my cutting plate because the tape I just stuck right on, it cuts face up. And it's really stuck onto that cutting plate pretty well. And I did use the original piece of tape that I die cut the first test with to hold the arrows onto the tape itself, just in case you're wondering. So I'm just going to try to carefully peel these off the cutting plate. So I'm going to start with the arrow, which I'm calling the positive mask. And as you can see with the purple tape, it came out perfectly, as does the negative mask. That comes out perfectly too, although it is curling up a little bit on the detailed areas. Now the paper tape is super thin, so I do rip it a little bit as I'm pulling it off. But the nice thing is I was able to just stick it right back down and fill in the hole for the positive mask, so that tear wasn't an issue at all. And then the negative mask came off perfectly too, which I was kind of surprised because that paper tape is pretty thin. Now the washi tape, you can see, has kind of got a fold in it. And so I think that's my fault. I'm going to blame that on me. Like when I stuck it down, I did not make sure it was flat. So the mask has a little bit of an error in it. The positive one and the negative one really does. So I didn't like that about it. I wasn't sure if that was my fault or if when it ran through, it kind of wrinkled on its own. But I'm going to say it was my fault. And then the blue painter's tape worked pretty much like the purple as far as the positive mask goes. It is curling up a little bit at the detailed areas, but then the negative mask is a mess. Like it peeled apart, it got all curled up, so I can't even use that negative mask. So I'm running some distress ink over each of the positive masks, and I'm not being very careful, and I'm being, a little bit heavier handed than I normally might be. So with the paper tape, when I was twisting the blending tool, it did start to pull up the little detail pieces on the end of the arrow. So I had to be careful going over that. The purple tape was pulling up on the kind of points of the arrow and then the end of the tail of it, and as were the washi tape and the blue tape. So they all had that problem. The paper tape did not pull up except when I used too much pressure when I was putting the ink over it. Everything else had a little bit of a pulling up issue here or there. But overall, they worked really well as a mask. Okay, so as I mentioned, the blue tape, I couldn't use the negative mask at all. So I'm doing the other 3. And remember that the washi tape mask is off because of my folding the tape accidentally. Now again, I had a little bit of curling on the purple tape and the washi tape at the detailed areas, but the paper tape didn't have any of that issue as a negative mask, so that was probably the best one. So as a positive mask, they all got 4s across the board. There was some curling, as I mentioned, at the detailed areas and the pointy areas on the purple tape, the washi tape, and the blue tape. And then the paper tape did tear a little bit when I first pulled it off the cutting mat, although I could fix that. And it does take like too much pressure will kind of pull it off the paper. So I had to be careful with that. So that brought it down to a 4. As far as a negative mask goes, the washi tape and the purple tape got a 4 again because, again, we had a little bit of curling and then the weird folding on the washi tape, which I wasn't totally sure what caused that. The paper tape did great, so I gave that a 5. Like, that was amazing as a negative mask. And then the blue got a 1 because I couldn't even use the negative mask. Now, that could have been because it was 1-inch tape. Maybe if I had thicker tape, it would have held up better. But I was just testing what I've got. So 1-inch did not work for a negative mask. Now this is showing you what I had left of the first piece of tape that I used to run the arrow die through in the very first test, after I just reused it and reused it and reused it until I couldn't use it anymore. Running it through my die cutter and die cutting out. I ran the arrow through a bunch of times, and then I used some birthday candles that you'll see in a second, dies to just cut a whole bunch of pieces over and over and over again. So the purple tape, all I have left is that tiny little piece after I used it 8 times. The paper tape kept going. Like, you can see it's curled up, but I ran that through 14 times and I could keep going. Those are little birthday candles. So I just gave up after 14, but I could still use that, and I will continue to use that. The washi tape was my least favorite because the washi tape actually... after the second pass through the die cutter, it started to rip the paper and it started to rip on itself. And so I wound up having to give up on the washi tape after 5 passes. And by then it wasn't even really sticking well because it had so much paper stuck to the back of it because it ripped it off the sides around the dies that it was really pretty much unusable. The blue tape started to rip the paper on the 4th pass through the machine, and then it started to really tear itself on pass number 6, and so I made it through up to pass number 8. And the purple tape I gave up on pass number 8. The purple tape started to tear on itself around pass number 6, and that was pretty bad. Like, it got really, really tiny and torn by 7. I did manage to get it through up to pass number 8. So as you can see, with reuse on die cutting, I gave the purple a 3.5 because every time I ran it through, it always left that residue around the die, that glue residue, and I just think that's not good. Even though it's easy to get off, that's a problem. And then, it only made it up to use number 8. And it tore quite a bit. Paper tape, I give a 5 because it really held up. It held up for 14 passes without any problems. Now this it had been run through once, so it was already a little destuck. If you run it through with very, very detailed dies that have like open sections in the center, that will start to tear it earlier, so it'll probably start to tear after 5 or 6 tries on those. But just regular dyes, it held up amazingly. The washi tape was my least favorite because, you know, it really didn't hold up well. It started to rip the paper, it started to tear on itself. It only went through twice after 2 uses, and then it only made it through 4 uses. The blue tape was a little better. It made it through 8 uses, but it did rip the paper quite early on. So in terms of cost for these, I to kind of determine my overall value rating, I basically kind of looked at what they scored on the other tests and then looked at the cost. And so that was a big factor for me because I think cost is important. And so the purple tape, as I mentioned, is anywhere from $6.69 to $7.99 for one roll of 1.5 inch wide by 15 yards of tape, which makes it about 45 to 53 cents per yard. Paper tape can be as expensive as $8.99 for one roll of a 2 inch wide by 10 yards, which is pretty pricey. But I found on Amazon you could get 6 rolls for $9.81. So that made the cost per yard 16 cents, which is a great deal. Washi tape, it varies by price and also by width. So I found it at anywhere from $4.99 for one roll to $9.99 for 6 rolls. You can also sometimes get them half off, so that would bring your cost down, but it's still pretty expensive at $1 to $1.66 per yard, or half of that, which still makes it pretty expensive, and it didn't really test that well. And then the blue tape I found for $6.58 for one roll of 1.5 inch wide by 60 yards. And then I found like some generic at Walmart where you could get 3 rolls for $9. And that makes the cost of that anywhere from 5 cents a yard to 11 cents per yard. So that is definitely like the least expensive option. So overall, my paper tape wins out for me at giving a 4.5 score. It's really inexpensive, especially if you buy it in the set of 6. They're not large rolls, so they're easy to store. And then they really overall had good durability and usage. They held up surprisingly well in things like the mask challenge, which I'd never used that for, and it did well. And it just keeps going and going and going for the main purpose of this product, which is to hold dyes in place while you run it through your die cutter. Blue tape was next. I got a 4 because it has a really, really low cost and overall pretty good durability and usage. It's not quite as good as the paper tape on reuse for die cutting, but I reuse it a lot for stencils and it works great on that. The purple tape got a 3.5, largely because of its expense. It is pretty pricey in my opinion, but it did do well on most of the tests. And does do a good job overall. I just think it's too expensive for what it is. And then the washi tape was my least favorite at 2.5 because it's pretty expensive and it only did okay on most of the tests. So not the best thing to be using for those types of activities, I would say. So hopefully this has been helpful. It's just my opinion and what I kind of conclusions I came to based on the testing I did. Let me know, what do you think? Do you like the purple tape? Have you tried it? Are you going to be spending money on that product? Or is this something that you're probably going to go with an alternative that's less expensive, as I will be doing? If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up, and I do reviews about once a month. Otherwise, I do card making tutorials twice a week, so please subscribe if you haven't done that yet. Thanks, have a great day.